LinkedIn News.
Optimism at the end of the day is trust, right? If we want to put another label on it, it's trust in yourself, that you will rise to the occasion, that your skills will pay off. It's also trust in other people, that we can get along, that we can both be successful. It's trust in humanity at its core. And I would say, don't you want to live in a world where distrust isn't that prevalent, where you can trust someone and still not be naive, but you could still trust and trust yourself? I think that's a pretty solid pitch.
That's mindfulness educator Case Kenny. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned to hear why optimism isn't about denying reality. It's a learnable skill you can use to build trust with yourself, the people around you, and yes, even the world. Don't forget to hit that follow button to get new episodes of our show every week. And if you want to hang out with me more, you can find me on socials. Finally, if you like this conversation, I have a favor to ask. Leave us a review wherever you're listening so we can keep bringing you more conversations that you love. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, this is Everyday Better, a show about the tools you need to create positive change in your mindset, your work, and every other area of your life. I'm Leah Smart, LinkedIn senior editor and a certified professional coach, and I help people become better versions of themselves one day at a time. And every week, I sit down with a trusted voice, so together we can explore how to take small steps toward big changes, the kind we plan for, strive toward, or never saw coming. So today, we're going to talk about optimism. Now, since you're here with me, I bet you're either an optimist or you want to have more optimism. I don't think we have any optimism naysayers, but if you're here, all are welcome. Now, here's what I want you to come away with today. A new and more helpful definition of optimism that encompasses all of the things we're experiencing, and a sense of the fact that you and we can do hard things. Now, I think optimism gets a bad rap. To realists, it can look like naivete or worse, like toxic positivity. And when the world feels especially dark and chaotic, clinging to optimism might seem like completely ignoring the reality. But what if optimism is not about burying your head in the sand or pretending everything's okay? What if instead it's actually a skill, meaning it can be learned, it can be developed, and perhaps even measured? And it's a skill that's grounded in real evidence that uses your history and our collective history to show that we've gotten through hard times before, that you and I are more capable than we might think, and that people in your life can be counted on. Yes, things can be difficult, and you can hold out hope that they'll improve. And that is how today's guest, Case Kenny, thinks about it. Case is a mindfulness educator known for his viral affirmations, guided journal, and live workshops. And as an author and podcast host, Case teaches people to shift their self-talk, challenge their doubts, and create mindsets rooted in optimism rather than fear. You and I probably didn't learn as kids just how much we can proactively shape how we think. That optimism isn't something that we were born with or born without, but something we can practice. I know I certainly was not taught this in school, and yet it might be the most important skill of all if you want to take risks, if you want to evolve or approach life with openness and curiosity instead of hesitation and fear. So today, Case is here to explain what optimism really is and how we can authentically cultivate it in ourselves. He's going to share why our mindsets start with our self-talk and how we can learn to challenge our negative beliefs. Plus, Case is going to share the lessons he's learned as he's made the leap from corporate life to working full-time as an author and mindfulness educator. Here's Case.
So I majored in Chinese and Arabic in college in a random twist of fate. And that was like a great experience. And I lived in China and I worked and it was great. Then I graduated and then I worked in advertising technology sales for 12 years. And that was great. And I was good at it. I started as an account executive, worked my way up to regional vice president. Somewhere along the way, I was like, man, my career is so clear. Like you do these things, you get promoted, you do well, you find fulfillment. It's awesome. It's amazing. But I compared that with who I was as a person, as a human, as a man, as a brother, as a partner, as a friend, as a son. And I was like, that is a little less clear for me. I don't have the clarity there of knowing what to do, how to be, what is my truth? What is my North Star? And I was a little bit frustrated by that fact. And the result of that frustration was I started this podcast, New Mindset Who Dis, in 2018, literally just as a attempt to know myself. So I would just do the podcast, 15 to 20 minutes myself, take a question, take an anxiety, take a ambition, and just examine it. And really the rest is history, because I realized what I was doing is that's a very practical form of mindfulness, the art of listening to yourself, but then also the art of speaking to yourself. How do I speak to what I feel? And then I did that for a while working my job, which was like really cool. It was this really like parallel reinvention as I worked and as I came into myself. And then with COVID, I just had a lot of time to think. And I was like, I could probably do this thing for a living. So I left the job in 2022 and have been doing this full time ever since. So it's, totally upended my understanding of career paths. And I come from a pretty traditional family. My brother's a doctor. My mom was a lawyer. Now I say I make a living from sharing my feelings.
Before we get into what you share your feelings about, some of
Whole
your
bunch
kind
of stuff.
I love all the
stuff.
things. I actually do want to just pause, because so many people have this as their dream, their own version of this dream. They're in a job doing work that they aren't necessarily feeling like aligns with who they are inside and outside of work. We all have those moments of like a dream that hits us, and we either decide to move toward it or we don't. You made the decision to actually do this. I want to know what that's like, because I think so many people have romanticized it. We all watch Shark Tank. I mean, I do every night. Side hustles, right? Like everyone wants to talk about how to do the thing you've always dreamed of and it will change your life. And I want to know what it's really been like for you.
It's such a profound question, because we all do. Even now, having the privilege of having left corporate behind to do the passion, I romanticize about what would look like after this. Grass is always greener.
Right.
The romanticizing will always continue. Certainly so. I am lucky. Like you think about the concept of ikigai, right? The like what you do, we can get paid for, what helps the world, the whole thing. Like I'm so incredibly lucky to have found that thing and to genuinely want to do it. But the reality is the reality. Like, if someone was like, I want to do what Case does, I would say, okay, so you want to wake up every day and you want to write for 4 hours and you want to figure out about how you could tell people about your book and your podcast, and you got to figure out how to make money 6 months from now because you don't get a paycheck. Like the realities of running your own business or being a full-time author, like there is a reality to it that very much so mirrors whatever frustration you have in your corporate career, your 9 to 5, the thing that you're trying to escape. So I think the most practical advice I always give is like side hustle your way and figure it out. Like I did it for a long time. And honestly, I think looking back, I think I might have even jumped a little too soon. I think sticking out a little bit longer would have been maybe the wiser move.
Why? That's a hot take.
Because I think a lot about it because the best thing you have in your business and your career is leverage of some kind. That is leverage that you say, I make this decision for this reason, not desperation. I need to take this deal. I need to do this thing. And leverage comes from financial security. You have another job that gives you a 401k and insurance and a paycheck that is building leverage such that when you do take the leap, you've got months of runway, you've got concurrent runway if you're still doing it. And you can say, I don't need to do this deal or write that book just for the paycheck. I don't need to put my quotes on a t-shirt just to make $20 because I need the money. You operate from that leverage, I think is a much more powerful mindset and it requires more patience. But I think it really serves people.
Well, and you also, it's interesting, right? Because you have to have this other skill set that you probably didn't have to start with that's all around the business that you're building for yourself, which is completely different than being a mindfulness expert. And so I've heard you, I know you talk about delusional confidence. Like, did you have to have some of that in order to take this step from sales into the work you're doing now?
Oh, for sure. And lightning struck pretty quickly. There was a luck to the timing of things in that I quit when I started to create these guided journals online. I was selling them e-commerce. And it was just a lucky moment of timing with where we were at with COVID. And there was just this demand for products that connected people with themselves. And it blew up like within the first 18 months. I won't throw numbers around, but it became a very, very sizable business very, very quickly. And I didn't know the first thing about running a business, much less shipping and logistics and taxes. And then I started to get them into retail. And I remember CVS was sending me their book on what I need to do to get them shipped and where the label needs to go and this and that. And like, I didn't even know what the words meant.
You're like, I was just trying to make a mindfulness journal.
I was like, oh, I'm just a guy.
Yeah,
literally. And so like to figure that all out was I think required delusional belief.
How do you define and how do you create delusional confidence?
Yeah, I think it's something you create. I don't think one day you find it and it's over there. Like, oh, that's where I left my delusional confidence.
Yeah.
It's created purely through evidence. Small evidence, big evidence, maybe the past evidence. Like, I thought that thing would break me. It didn't. All delusional means, if you look it up in a dictionary, is it means you're like unprepared or ill-informed. And I think sometimes people think to believe that you're good enough is an uninformed opinion. So if you feel uncomfortable and you're like, I am good enough, so be it. You're delusional. But that doesn't mean you don't belong there. It's just a feeling. It's just a judgment. It's just an observation. It's an assumption. So I say lean into it, create evidence for yourself, and inevitably that will bring something into your life that will say, okay, this was the right decision.
I'm curious, you talk about mindset a lot and mindfulness a lot. So this shift that you had from small to kind of overnight success, you said 18 months. Number one, I imagine, and I think many of us are sort of like, oh, we're waiting for the big break moment. But like people who win the lotto, I think oftentimes we don't think about what that actually does to your mindset and what you need to be prepared for that or what you need to do in the moment. How did you work through that? I mean, it's a very positive shift, but it's a huge one that must have rocked you in some ways.
I mean, I had a little bit of a taste of it in my sales career, and that you could enter into a scenario as a novice with no dollars sold against your quota, and then you can hit your quota. So I learned pretty quickly about, you can put yourself in an uncomfortable position and rise to the occasion. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because even alongside of like some of the initial success I had, it was always paired with imposter syndrome and like a little bit of gloom and doom on how inevitably it will come crashing down. Like I'm like a eternal optimist, but I'm also a chronic worrier and overthinker. And I think the space between those two emotional extremes is where I've really learned to plant my flag. How do I speak to myself in a way that honors where I am, but makes the next step entirely possible? And to do that in a really authentic way. I think a lot of people try to control their emotions, right? You feel a certain way and you're like, no, I don't want to feel that way. I want to feel this way. I think the key to all of this work, and it's really what I do within my ethos, is we always honor the emotion. Like we don't run from it. We name it. We put it on the table. We point at it. We say, that is the way I feel. I think a lot of people we're in a very like fake it till you make it type mentality, which I think the idea of that, of course, is great. But for me, it's like, it's not fake it till you make it. It's feel it till it's familiar. Like familiarity with the emotion is the goal. And you could do that very well through certain visualization techniques. But it's also like when you are in the space of that emotion, the good one, you're having that success, you own it. You don't pretend like it's going to disappear. And you try your best not to allow imposter syndrome, which is fine and natural, to override it. So really it's long-winded answer of the way that those emotions all work together and not allowing one to be particularly more loud than the other necessarily.
Yeah, I love that feel it till it's familiar. I had noticed I was on mat leave a bit ago, and while on mat leave, I had CNN on the entire time. I love CNN. However, the news, after a while, will get you down. It just might. And so I realized I'd become really negative. And I was like, oh my God, I've been using the 5-minute journal for, years. And I was like, let me just go get my 5-minute gratitude journal. And every day I will do gratitude. And that's just what I'll do. And I know the science behind it. I know after, a few months, all of a sudden you can be a different person. And I became one. And it reminded me of the fact that like I had so much agency, which I think is something that is really tough for people, especially now where we have information coming from everywhere. We can find whatever it is we want. We can learn about the things that are happening around the world that are really negative and challenging. And it can make us feel like we have no agency, we don't have power. And yet you say you're an eternal optimist, which I love. And I'm very resonant with, like, absolute worrier and eternal optimist. Yes. Have you always been that way? And how do you maintain that?
I would say more or less yes. So I would have the added benefit of maybe being genetically predisposed to optimism, if that's even a thing. Who knows? But I will say I think a lot of it has to do with how I speak to myself in the face of overwhelming bad news, chronic online algorithm sadness, right? These things that are bombarding us. And I lead a lot of these sessions for the NFL and corporate groups and things like that, where it comes to like, there are like 4 energies of like self-talk, generally speaking. The first is life happens to me. The second is life happens through me. Life happens by me, and life happens for me. If you could evolve the way you speak to yourself to the for me stage, it changes a lot. A lot of us are in the to me self-talk energy, which is a lot of things happen. It's all bad. It's all happening to me. I'm very passive in the sense of how things are bopping around in life. The more you evolve, you say, okay, well, that is a true statement because, of course, we can't control everything. But then we say, well, life happens through me. I can decide what to do with that piece of information. I can turn it into a standard, a boundary, a relationship, an ambition that's catalyzed through me. Then the more that you evaluate, you say, okay, well, life also happens by me. Like, to your point, self-agency. I have the ability to leave a scenario that does not serve me. I can start over. I can move cities. I could change jobs. And then the ultimate stage would be life happens for me. We all have examples in our lives where we can look back and say, that thing happened to me and it wasn't great. I didn't get the thing that I wanted. But now with hindsight, connecting the dots, I could see, oh, it didn't happen because I deserved different or better. And I can connect the dots, and it was a for me redirection type experience. The goal would be in the present then to be able to speak to yourself through that flow instead of condemning yourself, instead of assuming that the barrage of bad news is the entire reality of your future. So I think for me, I really leaned into that language with my self-talk. Optimism naturally comes from that because I define optimism as the belief that things can change. There isn't necessarily positivity associated with that statement. Like they could change for the worse, certainly. All that I need to know is that there is movement when it comes to emotions or events or relationships or the career. Things can change. And the only way to make that real is with the words that you use.
Okay, so optimism, right? Everyone thinks, I think a lot of people think of it as even post-toxic positivity like phase, that it's still like just making up that everything's great, everything's fine. So optimism in your definition is things can change.
Yes.
Got it.
That's simple. And even so within that, like I think a lot of times we think optimism is forward facing. Like optimism inherently is about the future, which it is. But I get a lot of my optimism from the past. Like what fuels the belief that things can change, or what fuels the belief that you can rise to the occasion? Well, it's the receipts you have in the past when you've done it in the past. I think optimism is built on a good memory, frankly. It's not built on fantasizing. It's not built on visualizing necessarily. These are great adjacent things. It's built on a strong memory. Your ability to look back and you say, you remember that one time when I thought my life was over, when that thing happened, and yet here I am? Remember that one time when I thought I was going to bomb that presentation and I didn't? And like you stack those receipts up and you use that to inform future optimism. I think that like it's a missing ingredient sometimes for people because we're so focused on filling in the blank of the future, filling in the blank of the future. Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe trying to steer it and control it, which inevitably will not work. So looking back, I think is powerful.
We are both obviously proponents of optimism. That's very clear. But I love talking to people who are skeptical, who are listening to this if they've made it this far and going, like, this is BS. And or like, why should I really care? Like, what's the actual case for being optimistic?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Well, I know there is quite a bit of science that supports optimistic mentalities when it comes to health and overall positivity. Like optimism at the end of the day is trust, right? If we want to put another label on it, it's trust in yourself that you will rise to the occasion, that your skills will pay off. It's also trust in other people, that we can get along, that we can both be successful. It's trust in humanity at its core. Like the one study that I always reference was in the workplace. These social scientists followed these groups of workers over several decades, and they basically divided them into 2 groups. The first group was the cynical group, was it's a dog-eat-dog corporate world. You got to step over some people, stab some people in the back to be successful. Don't trust anyone. Look out for yourself. The other group was widely labeled as they made trust their default. Trust in themselves, trust in others, trust that Bob from accounts receivable was the man and would do what he said he was going to do, trust that we could both get promoted, trust that there was enough money to go around. And overwhelmingly so, over those decades, the group that had trust as their default was promoted more, made significantly more money, and shown general signs of more positivity and just happiness in their life. Take that for what it's worth, but I've always found that to be an interesting anecdote. Not only in your career, but if you want to make more money and be promoted and be happier, make trust your default, which is optimism. Same can be true in relationships. Same can be true with yourself. So I think trust trust is the result of that optimistic mentality. And I would say, don't you want to live in a world where distrust isn't that prevalent, where you can trust someone and still not be naive, but you could still trust and trust yourself? I think that's a pretty solid pitch. The world needs more optimists. Those are the people who do the things that everyone else is like, that'll never work. And then it works and it changes the world. So without them, we'd be in big trouble.
Yeah, I love the description. Trust in myself, trust in others, trust in humanity, because I think of skeptics maybe as someone who might think of themselves as a realist, right? I'm a realist. I see what's happening in the world and I, have feelings about that. And so holding optimism feels, and honestly for me, I think of myself as an optimist. And yet, I was just talking to my husband last night and going, God, we just watched the news. It's so hard to hold the hope that I actually do naturally have for humanity and the optimism and the trust with what I see. And so I think that one of the skills that calls on is the ability to live in complexity, which I think a lot of us do not
oh my gosh,
know
it's
how
my
to
favorite
do.
topic.
Right? Like it's like, can you hold complexity
Yes.
versus only dualities?
Yeah.
How do you think about this? How do you advise people hold hope and trust for themselves, for others, and also awareness of what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, those statements need a megaphone because, that's where we're at in the world, whether it comes to politics or gender relations, everything. It's people's aversion to live in the nuance of life, to realize that two things can be true at once. Multiple emotions can exist at once. There doesn't always need to be winners and losers. There is an incredible ability to live in the in-between. And I don't know, you're not going to convince some people of that fact because we're all trying to figure out life. Yeah. And it's easier to be binary in the pursuit of that. It's easier to say this is true and this is not true. I think true wisdom comes from changing your mind, for one. And I think it comes from living in the space between emotions. Like for me, I am very optimistic, but I'm also chronic worrier and overthinker. Those two things can be true at the same time, yet I identify as an optimist because the space between them, I have decided a bunch of things. Well, namely that I write down pieces of clarity. Like I really do think like, if you want to be more optimistic, but you're like, well, I guess I'm just a realist because I just can't escape the reality of life. It's like there are moments in your life where you have created optimism and softness and vulnerability for yourself. Write it down and let that exist between those emotional extremes. Like for me, mantras and handwritten affirmations, like that is what allows for me to live between those two emotions. Otherwise, I'm going to gravitate towards the worrisome. We're all going to have negative emotions. You train yourself how to react to them in the present so that the negative emotion doesn't become your entire worldview. Like that is what the work's about. Yes, there is work that you do in real time and in the moment, but the majority of the work is done outside of the emotion. So you prepare yourself to encounter the emotion in a more positive way so that when you do feel a certain emotion, you're like, no, I've been here before and I've already decided what to make of this thing. And you live by it. And you have put the work into deciding these things.
So being optimistic doesn't mean ignoring our worries or being fake. It's about cultivating trust, finding the receipts, and relearning how we talk to ourselves. But if we're stuck in a negative cycle, how do we shake ourselves out of it? Coming up, Case is going to give you and I the writing exercises and reframes he uses to find a more optimistic outlook. We'll be back in just a few minutes. And we're back with mindfulness educator Case Kenny. So if we're in a situation then where we're going, I don't like this. I'm, in a job I don't like, or I'm living a place that I don't like, or I'm in a relationship I don't like, whatever it is, not something that we can change maybe immediately. What's a reframe we can use? Is it that is it saying, I'm not happy? And then moving into things can change? How do we actually do this on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, I think first is naming the emotion you feel. I call it like the difference between forest and tree words. A lot of the times we gravitate towards these forest words. I feel anxious. I feel unlovable. I feel stuck. These big labels, which are true, of course, but they're like the highest level. How can we define that feeling a little bit more specifically, the tree feeling? I remember I led this one session where this one creative director, I basically take people through these prompts. I say, first, I want you just to write down how you feel. No guidance. And she wrote down that she was just burned out at work. And that was her emotion. That was the center of her universe. That was her reaction to everything. I am burned out. And then everything supported that notion. And then the more that we worked through the language, her final output was, it wasn't burned out. It was, she was feeling creatively uninspired. She had all this passion inside of her, and yet she had nowhere to put it. When we do feel a certain negative way, we tend to adopt that as our entire identity and emotion. So like when we do feel burned out, you say, man, am I burned out? I am burned out. Or maybe some people say, I feel burned out. And I think there's a lot of approaches in therapy circles nowadays of like, how can we show ourselves that there's different parts of us? A part of me feels burned out. It's this part right here. And being able to name that part and unblend it from the whole of who you are, now it's here and we can address it and we can put specific words behind it. And then, of course, to your question, I mean, then it's about introducing change and other things that would allow for us to perhaps move away from that feeling and evolve through that feeling. I think a lot of the reality of life is, there's going to be times where you feel a certain kind of negative way and there's really no immediate way out of it, because that's the reality of the situation. The key that I found, and a lot of psychology backs this up as well, is like, how do you build mental resilience in the face of that? It's you lean into the concept of alternate selves. And that if you're feeling burned out at work and you only really identify your worth by your work, that is dangerous territory, because suddenly the one thing that matters so much to you is troublesome. Your identity falls apart. The idea of alternate selves is, what are the other versions of you? Like and not necessarily like the versions of you that you make money from skills or whatever, but like you could be a friend, you could be really into fitness, you could be a beekeeper on the weekends. You know, like I just got into running. I'm a little bit late. I'm 37. Just kind of started like running.
You can start anytime.
And I wouldn't say I'm a amazing great runner, but it's awesome and it brings me so much joy. And there's all kinds of like small little things like that we should lean into. Like I would say I am a runner. Cool. That's an alternate self for Case. I'm also a writer, also a boyfriend, also a son. I like house music, like all these different things that you can combine.
It's funny, as you were talking about this idea of I am a runner, I've been a runner for a while. And as I got pregnant, et cetera, I was like, I can't run anymore.
Oh, yeah.
And my first time that I had to stop running was an injury. So I've had 2 moments where I was no longer a runner. And so this idea of alternate selves is really powerful, because I spent so much time mourning the fact that I couldn't run, because it was such a big part of my identity. I couldn't imagine who I was if I wasn't running. And I had to go through this like whole process with my therapist to be like, okay, let me figure out what else I can do. And it actually turned me on to yoga, which I had never been into, because I was like, no, working out means running in my mind. And that's just been my life since I was like 15. So, it actually gave me something new, but I did have to mourn like the end of a thing, and didn't really end, right? Like I run now again, but it felt like it was over in the moment.
That story right there, to me, like that's the key for gratitude in the narrative arc you just described of running, loving running, having 2 injuries and life changes that precluded you from running, and now you're back to running. Like when I think about like gratitude as a topic, I lean a lot on the work of Thich Nhat Hanh, but he has this quote he calls it a non-toothache, where he says that when we have a toothache, we know that not having a toothache is a wonderful thing. Yet when we don't have a toothache, we're still not happy.
Right.
Which is basically the idea that as humans, when something sucks, when something is distracting, that's all we could think about. Yet when we've like healed from it, we just move on to the next thing. We're not grateful for no longer having that toothache. We just move on to, okay, well now my ankle hurts and my heart hurts from a breakup. We just move on to the next thing. So when I think about gratitude, I have people do it in reverse. So like the fact that you could run now is amazing. To feel the pure gratitude of that fact, you sit down and you write and you say, I'm grateful to not, and you describe those injuries that you had in the past, and you feel that former pain that now you don't have, and you bring it into the present. And you say, I'm grateful to not be immobile and feel stuck and feel trapped and feel unhealthy. And like you write those things down and you immerse yourself in that past. But then in the present, you feel lighter because it's not your reality.
Yeah, I mean, as we're talking about this, this is obvious now, but just to name it, optimism is a skill, which means you can learn it, you can measure it, you can repeat
Absolutely.
it. Yeah. So when you're out of practice, what are the first things you gravitate to that someone who has never practiced this skill before could start with?
Well, I think the best is guided journaling, because it gives intention to vocabulary. Because otherwise,
what is guided journaling?
Yeah, so I mean, you could literally buy a guided journal. So someone's already done the work for you of coming up with a good, powerful question. If you're more of a stream of consciousness type person, you start with an emotion. I feel a certain way. and then you navigate through it, and you start to ask yourself certain questions about it. Is it true? Where's the proof that it's true? And like one of my favorite questions is like helping people put a limiting belief on paper, something that they either overtly say about themselves or that they sneakily believe, and they write it down and you look at it on the paper, and then you ask yourself the question of, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I'm wrong about this thing that I've believed for a long time? What would that look like? And now you could put two realities down on paper and see how those interplay with each other. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like a lot of thoughts live in our head. There's a lot of work that's been done on the subconscious mind and Michael Singer and are our thoughts, and where do they originate and who knows what? How do you make sense of it? Writing a thought down to me is effectively freezing it for 10, 20 seconds. So finally, without bias, you can hopefully, to the best of your ability, reflect on it, freeze it, and move with intention. I call journaling intentional thinking. I think a lot of our thinking isn't intentional. It is. It is not. It is crazy. How many crazy, wild, absurd, unhinged thoughts do we have?
Yeah. And most of them are automatic. They're not controlled by us. They have nothing to do with our character or who we are, even though we might think that.
Exactly. But if you don't put it down on paper and separate it, to me, it's a very tactile experience. And I think that really helps draw in the contrast that's needed to say, well, this is, at minimum, a part of me feels this way. And the majority of the cases, well, that's just entirely untrue and just like a weird comical thing.
Yeah, I mean, as I hear you talk about this, the first thing I think of is the fact that most of us are not familiar with what we say to ourselves and about the world around us. Like most people are not walking around thinking, oh, I do have an inner roommate, as Michael Singer would call it, right? Like I have this thing inside my head, my favorite book, thing inside my head that's talking to me all the time. And so the beauty and power of journaling, which can sometimes for people sound woo-woo or hokey, is like you are getting this somewhere where you can actually see it and reflect on it. Yeah. And as you were talking about this practice, I think for people who are hoping to be more optimistic, perhaps a question is, what do I think I'm right about that could be holding me back? Like, what do I believe right now that I am so right about that I'm willing to sit in right now that could be holding me back? Like, if I believe I'm right that, like, I'll never be successful at this because, then I should write that down because perhaps I'm willing to be wrong about it. And what would that look like?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the journal exercise that I described earlier. Put it down. Put those two opposing beliefs down, or at least put the first one, and then question it. What if I'm wrong about it? I mean, I think that is such, whether it's in the context of like an acute imposter syndrome or a mindset that's holding you back, or it's just within the context of you're older now and it's time to reevaluate some beliefs. I mean, if you're not evaluating like what you believe at a high frequency, inevitably you're living by what you used to believe that's no longer true. Or at the worst case scenario, you're living by something that someone else thinks is true but isn't true for you. So, and that's fine. Right? The whole point of life is to reinvent and to update your beliefs. And I think it requires a little bit of stripping of the ego, because once you've decided that something no longer matters to you, that maybe you put a lot of work into, suddenly you could start labeling it as like a failure, or you're starting over from zero. And like, what was I doing? And I think, they refer to it as an ego death. Like things like that, I think you have to approach with humility, trust, these things that all fuel optimism, but at its core, it's challenging those previous beliefs, making sure they align with your current self, the belief in the future, the trust in the future.
Beautiful. Case, thank you so much for being here. This was awesome.
Great chat.
Yes, and
Super
good luck with the book.
Thank you.
I'm sure it'll go great. But
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Case Kenny, mindfulness educator and author of The Opposite of Settling. If you liked this episode, make sure you check out last week's with cognitive scientist Maya Shankar. You can find a link to that in the show notes. Give it a listen and let me know what you think. And then we'll see you next week with Gretchen Rubin, author of The Happiness Project and host of the show Happier. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin, Emily Reeves, and Ava Ahmadbegi. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. Tim Boland mixed our show. We get additional support from Alex Kuznetsova and Mujib Merdad. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Maya Pope-Chappelle is director of content and audience development. Courtney Koop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is LinkedIn's editor-in-chief and vice president of content development. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and we'll see you next week.